NIF, you believe that a mother's love is the most powerful force on earth, and that true justice, no matter how long it takes, will always find its way. Then you need to hear this story. Hit that subscribe button and get ready, because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. NTHE, cold night air hit my face like a slap, a brutal shock against the sweat and tears already covering my skin. The rough concrete of the porch scraped against my bare feet, but I barely felt it. All I felt was the searing, tearing pain in my abdomen as my fresh C-section stitches ripped open, one by one, and I was being dragged. My husband, the man who had held my hand and wept with joy just hours before, had his fingers locked around my upper arm, his grip like a vice. He was dragging me out of our home. In my other arm, I clutched a bundle of blankets, a fragile, precious weight that contained the two reasons for my agony and my existence: my newborn twin sons. "Daniel, please," I sobbed, the words a shredded plea. "The babies, they're only hours old. They'll get sick. Please, let us go back inside." NHE didn't even look at me. His face, illuminated by the harsh glare of the porch light, was a mask I didn't recognize. It was cold, empty, devoid of the love I had built my life around. His eyes were fixed on the sleek, black car, idling at the curb, a car I had never seen before. A woman was in the driver's seat, her silhouette a dark omen against the streetlights. "And get in the car, Clara," he said, his voice flat, dead. It was the voice of a stranger. What? What are you talking about? Who is that? My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and terror. The pain from my incision was a white-hot fire, and a warm, wet sensation began to spread across the front of my thin hospital gown. Blood. My blood. NHE finally turned his head, and his eyes met mine. The emptiness in them was more terrifying than any rage. I said, "Get in the car. She's taking you to your mother's." "My mother's?" "Daniel, my mother lives 5 states away. It's a 12-hour drive. The babies, they can't travel like that. I can't travel like that. I just had major surgery." One of the twins, the one I had named Leo, let out a tiny, distressed cry, his little face scrunching up in the cold. The sound seemed to snap something in Daniel. His grip tightened, and he gave me a final, brutal shove toward the open back door of the car. I stumbled, almost dropping the precious bundle in my arms. I caught myself on the car door, my body screaming in protest. "She's been paid," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "She'll get you there. This is over, Clara. The house is sold. Your things are gone. This life, our life, is over." NTHE words didn't make sense. Sold? Gone? We had just brought our sons home, to this house, to the nursery he had spent months painting, to the life we had dreamed of for years. I looked past him, through the open front door. The living room, which should have been filled with baby gifts and flowers, was barren. The furniture was gone. The pictures were off the walls. It was a hollow, empty shell. NHE had not just planned to leave me. He had erased me. NHE reached for the bundle in my arms. "Give them to me," he commanded. "They're staying here," and a primal, animalistic instinct surged through me, overriding the pain and the shock. I recoiled, clutching my sons to my chest. "No," I snarled, the word ripping from my throat. "No, you can't have them." NFOR the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Annoyance. "Don't be stupid, Clara. You have nothing. No money, no home. You can't take care of them. I can. They are my sons, my legacy. They stay with me." NHE saw them not as our children, but as his possessions, his heirs. And I was just the vessel, the incubator, now deemed disposable. The woman in the car honked the horn, a sharp, impatient sound that cut through the night. Daniel's jaw tightened. He took a step toward me, his hands reaching for my babies, and in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could surrender my children to this monster he had become, and be driven away into nothingness, or I could fight. Bleeding, broken, and terrified, I made my choice. As his hands lunged for my sons, I did the only thing I could. I screamed. It wasn't a plea for help. It was a war cry, a sound of pure, undiluted maternal rage that echoed through the silent, sleeping street. I would die on this sidewalk before I let him take my children. And as the first light of a neighbor's window flickered on, I knew this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a war. And he had no idea who he had just declared it on. Nay, our life before that night was a masterpiece of deception, though I was the only one who didn't know it. Daniel and I were the golden couple. We met in college, he the charismatic business major, with a smile that could charm the stars from the sky, and I the quiet art history student, content to live in his glow. He was ambitious, driven, and he painted a future for us so vivid I could taste it. He came from old money, a family whose name was etched onto university buildings and museum wings. His parents, Elizabeth and Richard, were polite but distant, their approval of me seeming conditional, as if they were waiting to see if I would be a worthy addition to their dynasty. Daniel, however, assured me I was everything he wanted. "You're real, Clara," he'd say, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're not like the women I grew up with. You have a soul." I believed him. I loved him with an intensity that consumed me. We married a year after graduation in a lavish ceremony funded by his parents. It was a society wedding, a merger of his family's legacy and my boundless love. We moved into a beautiful home in a wealthy suburb, a gift from his parents, and Daniel started his own investment firm, using his family's connections to build a rapid empire. NMY life was a fairy tale. I wanted for nothing. I had a loving husband, a beautiful home, and the promise of a family. The only shadow in our perfect world was the subtle, constant pressure from his parents. At every family dinner, in every phone call, the question would arise, veiled in polite inquiry. "Any news?" Elizabeth would ask, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "Richard and I are so looking forward to grandchildren. A boy, of course, to carry on the family name." Daniel would laugh it off in front of them, but in private the pressure seeped into our lives. It became his obsession. He talked about our son as if he were a foregone conclusion. He spoke of the schools he would attend, the sports he would play, the business he would one day inherit. When we struggled to conceive, the obsession intensified. We embarked on a grueling journey of fertility treatments. Each failed attempt was a blow, not just to our hopes, but to his pride. I saw a side of him I hadn't seen before, a cold, clinical frustration. I was no longer his wife. I was a project that was failing to yield the desired results. NTHE process was invasive, emotionally draining, and physically taxing on me. I endured countless injections, procedures, and hormonal shifts, all while trying to manage Daniel's growing impatience. He became distant, his affection turning into a kind of detached management. He would track my cycles on a spreadsheet, his questions more suited to a lab technician than a husband. "Did you take the shot at precisely 8 p.m.? Did you avoid all caffeine?" The doctor said the romance was gone, replaced by a relentless pursuit of an heir. Finally, after years of heartbreak, we had a breakthrough. We were pregnant, and not just with one baby, but with 2. Twins. When the doctor confirmed it, Daniel's reaction was euphoric. He wept, lifting me off my feet in the doctor's office. The charming, loving man I had fallen in love with was back. "We did it, Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." NTHE rest of the pregnancy was a dream. He was attentive, doting, a caricature of the perfect father-to-be. He catered to my every craving, massaged my swollen feet, and spent months designing the most elaborate nursery I had ever seen. He bought them tiny designer clothes and opened trust funds in their names before they were even born. His parents were equally thrilled, the chill in their demeanor melting away, replaced by an almost feverish excitement. The dynasty was secure. NTHE day of my scheduled C-section was the happiest day of my life. Daniel held my hand through the entire procedure, his eyes locked on mine. When the doctor announced, "It's a boy," a triumphant cheer went through the operating room. Daniel kissed me, his face wet with tears. A minute later, the doctor announced, "And another boy." Daniel looked like he had won the lottery. Leo and Noah, our sons, his heirs. They were perfect, healthy, and beautiful. NWE spent 2 days in the hospital, a blissful bubble of new parenthood. Daniel never left my side. He held the babies, changed their diapers, and looked at me with an adoration I hadn't felt in years. "You did it, my love," he said, his voice full of awe. "You gave me everything." On the 3rd day, we brought our sons home. As we walked through the front door, Daniel carrying one car seat and I the other, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggle was over. The perfect life was finally, truly ours. NTHAT evening. I was exhausted but deliriously happy. I sat on the couch, a baby nestled in each arm, watching Daniel move around the room. He seemed agitated. He was on his phone, speaking in low, hushed tones. "It's all set for tonight," I heard him murmur. I assumed he was talking to his parents, arranging for them to visit. NHE came over and kissed the top of my head. "I'm going to run a quick errand, okay? I'll be right back." I nodded, too tired to question it. I drifted off to sleep on the couch, my son sleeping peacefully on my chest. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I woke up with a start. The house was quiet, too quiet. Daniel wasn't back. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I carefully stood up, my incision screaming in protest, and carried the twins upstairs to their bassinets in our bedroom. That's when I saw it. The closet doors were wide open. All of his clothes were gone. His drawers were empty. His watch box, his cufflinks, his side of the bathroom vanity, all cleared out. It was as if he had been surgically removed from our life. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I grabbed my phone to call him, but a message popped up on the screen. It was a bank alert. Our joint savings account, the one containing all the money I had from my own inheritance from my grandparents, had been emptied. A transfer of the full amount to an unknown account had been completed just 20 minutes earlier, and my knees went weak. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. This wasn't an errand. This was something else. I heard a car pull up outside. Relief washed over me. It was him. He was back. He would explain everything. I rushed downstairs as fast as my aching body would allow, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. And I threw open the front door, a desperate explanation ready on my lips. But the man standing on the porch was the cold, empty stranger I had seen glimpses of over the years, and behind him, the house was no longer my home. It was a hollowed-out stage set, and as he grabbed my arm and began to drag me into the cold night, I finally understood. The fairy tale was a lie. The loving husband was a role he had played. I hadn't been a wife. I had been a contract. And with the birth of his sons, my part of the deal was done, and my contract had been terminated. NNTHE woman drove with a grim, silent efficiency. She never spoke a word to me, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. My pleas and questions were met with a stony silence that was more chilling than any threat. I was a piece of cargo she was being paid to transport. In the back seat, I huddled over my sons, trying to shield them from the draft coming through the window. The thin hospital gown was soaked through with a mixture of sweat, tears, and blood. The pain in my abdomen was a constant, throbbing agony, a physical manifestation of my shattered heart. And every few hours, the woman would pull into a desolate, 24-hour gas station. She would get out, fill up the tank, and buy a bottle of water for herself, never once looking at me or acknowledging the 2 tiny infants in the car. During one of these stops, desperation gave me a surge of adrenaline. While she was inside paying, I fumbled for the door handle. It was locked. She had activated the child locks. I was a prisoner. I looked down at my sons, their faces so innocent and peaceful, oblivious to the nightmare they had been born into. A wave of fury, so pure and potent it burned away my fear, washed over me. He would not get away with this. NWE arrived at my mother's house just as the sun was rising. The sleek black car pulled up to the curb of her small, modest home and stopped. The woman finally turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. "This is it," she said, her first and only words to me. The doors unlocked. She didn't wait for me to get out. As I stumbled onto the sidewalk, clutching my sons, the car sped away, disappearing down the street as if it had never been there. NMY mother, a widow who lived a quiet life, opened the door before I could even knock. Her face, usually so calm, crumpled in horror at the sight of me. I was a ghost on her doorstep, blood-stained and broken, holding her newborn grandsons. I collapsed into her arms, the strength I had clung to for 12 hours finally giving way. "He's gone, Mom," I sobbed into her shoulder. "He took everything." NTHE next few hours were a blur of frantic activity. My mother, a retired nurse, took one look at my condition and immediately called an ambulance. At the local hospital, the doctors were horrified. My C-section incision had become severely infected, and I was suffering from significant blood loss. I was rushed into emergency surgery to repair the damage. As they wheeled me away, I clung to my mother's hand. "The babies," I pleaded. "Don't let anyone take them." "Never," she promised, her eyes blazing with a protective fire I hadn't seen since I was a child. "They are safe with me." And I spent a week in that small-town hospital, my body slowly healing while my mind raced. My mother became my general. She brought the twins to the hospital every single day, allowing me to hold them, feed them, and bond with them, rebuilding the connection that Daniel had tried to sever. She also brought me a laptop, and from my hospital bed, I began to fight back. NTHE, first thing I discovered was the true extent of Daniel's betrayal. He hadn't just sold our house. He had sold it months ago, in a secret deal that closed the day after our sons were born. The furniture, the art, my personal belongings, all of it had been sold or disposed of. He had systematically erased every trace of our life together. He had drained not only our joint account, but had also taken out a massive loan against his business, effectively leveraging its entire value before disappearing. He had vanished along with millions of dollars, and I searched for his parents, Elizabeth and Richard, hoping for some explanation, some shred of decency. I found a press release. They had announced a massive multi-million-dollar donation to a European art foundation and their immediate relocation to Paris to oversee the project. The timing was no coincidence. They had fled the country with him, or at least facilitated his escape. They were all in on it. The entire family, the entire dynasty, was a sham built on cruelty and deceit. NTHE police in my hometown were sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. It was a domestic dispute, they said, a messy divorce. The financial matters were a civil issue, not a criminal one. Because my name wasn't on the house's deed, a detail Daniel had insisted was for tax purposes. I had no legal claim to it. Because my name wasn't on his business, I had no claim to that either. The money in the joint account was legally his, as much as it was mine. He had been clever, meticulous, and cruel, using the law as a weapon against me. It was in that sterile hospital room, with the rhythmic beeping of the machines and the quiet strength of my mother beside me, that the grief and shock finally solidified into something hard and sharp. Resolve. They had left me with nothing, that they had underestimated me. They thought of me as a soft, pliable accessory. They had forgotten that the quietest people often have the strongest will. They had taken my home, my money, and my sense of security. That they had left me my sons. And they had left me my rage. NMY mother found me a lawyer, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who specialized in complex family law and financial fraud. She worked out of a small office above a bakery, but she had a reputation for being a shark. I met her the day I was discharged from the hospital. I sat in her office holding a sleeping Leo in my arms, while my mother held Noah. I told her everything. Sarah listened intently, her expression growing grimmer with every detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is not a divorce, Clara," she said, her voice firm. "This is a conspiracy. They treated you like a surrogate, and when you delivered, they tried to discard you. What they did isn't just immoral, it's criminal. It's fraud, it's endangerment, and it's kidnapping. But the local police won't see it that way. We have to go bigger. NHER plan was audacious. We wouldn't just file for divorce. We would file a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against Daniel and his parents, alleging a conspiracy to defraud, and we would go to the federal authorities. Daniel had moved millions of dollars across state and international lines as part of his scheme. That wasn't a civil matter. That was money laundering. They think they're untouchable, Sarah said, a predatory gleam in her eye. They live in a world where money and power can solve any problem. We're going to show them that some things, like a mother's bond with her children, are beyond their control. We're going to make them visible. We're going to make them accountable. Leaving her office that day, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time. The path ahead was daunting. I was a single mother with 2 newborn infants, living in my mother's spare bedroom, with no money to my name. But I had a purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior. My sons, sleeping peacefully in their car seats, were my reason. Justice was my mission. The war had begun, and I was ready to fire the first shot. And NTHE, years that followed were a crucible. They forged me into someone I never thought I could be. Life was a stark contrast to the gilded cage I had lived in with Daniel. We lived in my mother's small 2-bedroom house. The grand nursery was replaced by 2 second-hand cribs squeezed into my childhood bedroom. Designer baby clothes were replaced by hand-me-downs from my mother's friends at church. The silence of our large, empty house was replaced by the constant, chaotic, beautiful noise of 2 growing boys. And I had never been happier. And I learned the meaning of a day's work. I took a job at a local art gallery, a small, humble place that smelled of turpentine and old wood. The pay was barely enough to cover diapers and formula, but it was mine. It was honest. Every dollar I earned was a victory, a small piece of the independence Daniel had tried to strip from me. I worked during the day while my mother, my unwavering rock, cared for Leo and Noah. At night, I would come home, my body aching with fatigue, and I would hold my sons, their unconditional love the fuel that kept me going, and they grew from tiny, fragile infants into rambunctious, curious toddlers. Leo was the adventurer, bold and fearless, with his father's charming smile but none of his cruelty. Noah was the observer, quiet and thoughtful, with my eyes and a deep, soulful wisdom. They were my world. They were the living, breathing proof that Daniel had not destroyed me. In fact, he had given me the 2 greatest gifts of my life. Meanwhile, the legal battle raged on, a slow, grinding war of attrition. Sarah Jenkins was a genius and a bulldog. We filed the civil suit, and as she predicted, Daniel's family responded with an army of high-priced lawyers from a prestigious New York firm. They filed motion after motion to have the case dismissed, claiming it was frivolous, a desperate money grab from a disgruntled ex-wife. They tried to bury us in paperwork, to bankrupt us with legal fees. In BUT, they underestimated our resolve. Sarah worked pro bono, fueled by her own sense of outrage. And they underestimated the power of our story. Sarah leaked key details of the case to a national newspaper. The story of the wealthy dynasty that hired a woman to transport a new mother across state lines after a C-section, leaving her bleeding on her mother's doorstep, was sensational. It was monstrous. The resulting public relations nightmare was something even their money couldn't easily fix. The family's carefully crafted image of philanthropic aristocrats began to crack. NTHE federal investigation was even slower, a silent, invisible current moving beneath the surface. We provided the FBI with everything: bank records, timelines, the name of the transport company, which turned out to be a shell corporation specializing in discreet security services. It was a long, frustrating process with no guarantee of success. There were many nights when I would sit at my kitchen table, surrounded by legal documents, and feel a wave of despair wash over me. It felt like I was fighting a ghost, an invisible empire of wealth and influence. During these dark moments, my mother would sit with me. "Patience, Clara," she would say, her hand covering mine. Justice is not a sprint, it's a marathon. You just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other. One of the hardest parts was explaining it to my sons. As they got older, they began to ask questions. Why don't we have a daddy? Where is our daddy? I chose to tell them a simplified, age-appropriate version of the truth. Your father had to go away for a very long time, I would say. But you have me, and you have Grandma, and we love you more than anything in the world. I refused to poison them with hatred. I was determined to raise them to be good, kind men, the opposite of their father in every way that mattered. NTHE turning point came nearly 5 years after that horrific night. The FBI's investigation had finally borne fruit. They had been tracking the flow of money from Daniel's accounts, a complex web of offshore banks and shell corporations designed to hide his assets. They had found him. He had been living in a small, exclusive principality in Europe, a haven for wealthy tax exiles, living under a new name, but with the same lavish lifestyle. His parents had been funneling him money through their art foundation, a classic money laundering scheme. NTHE News came in a call from Sarah. "They got him, Clara," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. "The Department of Justice is unsealing the indictment. They're charging him and his parents with conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. They've issued an international arrest warrant." And I sank into a chair, the phone pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't over, but it was the beginning of the end. The ghost I had been fighting for 5 years suddenly had a face and a location. He was no longer untouchable. That night, I tucked my sons into bed. They were 6 years old, their faces soft with sleep. I kissed their foreheads and whispered the same thing I whispered every night. "I love you. You are safe." For the first time in 5 years, I truly believed it. The sword I had been forging in the fires of adversity was finally sharp, and I was ready to bring it to the final battle. The marathon was nearing its finish line, and I had the strength to see it through. NTHE International Arrest Warrant triggered a domino effect that was swift and catastrophic for Daniel's family. The principality where he was hiding, under pressure from the U.S. government, froze his assets and detained him. His parents, who were in New York for a gallery opening, were arrested by federal agents as they stepped out of their limousine. The images were broadcast on every news channel. The elegant, silver-haired couple, their faces masks of shock and indignation, being led away in handcuffs. The empire of lies had begun to crumble in the most public way imaginable. NTHE legal proceedings were complex, spanning 2 continents. Daniel fought his extradition for months, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. He was eventually flown back to the United States in the custody of U.S. Marshals. The first time I saw him again was in a federal courtroom. He had aged. The charming, confident man was gone, replaced by a gaunt, haunted figure in a prison jumpsuit. His eyes, when they briefly met mine across the crowded room, held not hatred or remorse, but a kind of hollow disbelief, as if he still couldn't comprehend how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. NHI's parents, stripped of their finery and their team of handlers, seemed equally diminished. Elizabeth's icy composure had shattered, revealing a frail, terrified woman. Richard's blustering authority had evaporated, leaving behind a defeated old man. They had built their world on a foundation of arrogance, believing their wealth made them immune to consequences. They had never imagined that the quiet, unassuming girl they had deemed unworthy would be the architect of their downfall. NTHE criminal trial was a media circus. The prosecution, armed with the mountain of evidence Sarah and the FBI had compiled, laid out the conspiracy in meticulous, damning detail. They presented the forged documents from the sale of the house, the labyrinthine trail of laundered money, and the testimony of the woman who had driven me to my mother's. She had been granted immunity in exchange for her cooperation, and her flat, emotionless account of that night sent a chill through the courtroom. NTHE defense tried to argue that it was a simple marital dispute that had been blown out of proportion, that Daniel was a loving father who had suffered a mental breakdown under the pressure of new parenthood. But the evidence of his calculated, long-term planning was irrefutable. the secret sale of the house, the establishment of offshore accounts months before the twins were born, the hiring of the transport service, it all pointed to a cold, premeditated crime. NTHE most powerful moment of the trial came when I took the stand. Sarah had prepared me for this, but nothing could truly prepare me for the experience of telling my story under the cold lights of the courtroom, with the men who had tried to destroy me sitting just feet away. I didn't look at them, I looked at the jury. I told them about the joy of my son's birth, the confusion and terror of being dragged from my home, the searing pain of my stitches tearing, and the cold, empty look in my husband's eyes. I spoke of the 5 years of struggle, of raising my sons alone, of the constant fear and uncertainty. I didn't cry. My voice was steady, infused with the strength I had earned. When the prosecutor asked me what I wanted, I paused. I want my sons to know that in this world, you cannot buy your way out of decency, I said, my voice clear and strong. I want them to know that their mother did not let them be taken, and that the law protects the vulnerable, not just the powerful. I want justice, not for me, but for the life they almost never had. NTHE jury's verdict was swift. Guilty. On all counts. Daniel and his parents were convicted of conspiracy, fraud, and money laundering. The judge, in his sentencing, was scathing. He called their actions a chilling display of moral bankruptcy and a betrayal of the most fundamental human bonds. He sentenced them to significant prison terms, ensuring they would spend their remaining years paying for their crimes. The civil suit, which had been running in parallel, concluded shortly after. With the criminal conviction as leverage, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. The court awarded me a settlement that was staggering. It included the full value of the house, the money Daniel had stolen from our joint account, and punitive damages that amounted to a substantial portion of the family's remaining unfrozen assets. Then I walked out of the courthouse that day into the bright sunlight, holding Sarah's hand. I felt no elation, no triumphant glee. I felt a profound, quiet sense of relief. The war was over. The ghosts had been vanquished. I was no longer a victim or a warrior. I was just a mother who could finally go home and tell her sons that the world was safe again. NTHAT night. For the first time in years, I slept without the familiar knot of anxiety in my stomach. The marathon was over. I had crossed the finish line. And I had won. Not just money or a legal victory, but my life, my freedom, and the future of my children. And with the legal battles behind me, I was faced with a new, unfamiliar challenge: peace. For years, my life had been defined by the fight. Every decision, every ounce of energy, had been directed toward the singular goal of achieving justice. Now, in the quiet aftermath, I had to learn how to simply live. NTHE settlement gave me financial security beyond my wildest dreams, but I knew that money was not the foundation upon which I wanted to build our new life. The real foundation was the love and resilience we had forged in the fire. My first decision was to leave the small town that had been our sanctuary. It held too many memories, both good and bad. I wanted a fresh start, a place where we were not defined by our past. And I bought a house in a quiet coastal town a few hours away, a place known for its good schools and strong sense of community. It wasn't a mansion like the one I had shared with Daniel. It was a warm, welcoming home with a big backyard for the boys to play in, close enough to the ocean that we could smell the salt in the air. My mother moved with us, her presence a constant, comforting anchor in our lives. NTHE boys, now 7, thrived. They made friends easily, fell in love with baseball and surfing, and filled the new house with the sounds of laughter and adventure. They were happy, well-adjusted children, a testament to the power of a stable, loving environment. The shadow of their father was a distant memory, a story they knew, but that did not define them. And I, too, began to build a new identity. I was no longer just a mother or a fighter. I was Clara. I went back to school and finished my degree in art history. I started a small foundation, the Phoenix Foundation, dedicated to providing legal and financial support to single mothers who were victims of financial abuse and fraud. I used my story, my resources, and the expertise of Sarah Jenkins, who sat on the foundation's board, to help women who were trapped in the same kind of nightmare I had escaped. It was the most fulfilling work of my life. I met women from all walks of life, their stories of betrayal and resilience, both heartbreaking and inspiring. I saw myself in their eyes, and I was able to offer them something I had desperately needed: hope and a practical path forward. We provided them with top-tier lawyers, forensic accountants, and trauma counselors. We gave them a voice and the tools to fight back. The foundation became my purpose, a way to transform my pain into power for others. One afternoon, I was at a local park with the boys. They were on the swings, their legs pumping as they tried to see who could go higher, their laughter carrying on the breeze. I was sitting on a bench, watching them, when a man sat down next to me. He was a father from their school, a kind-faced architect named Ben, whose daughter was in Leo's class. We had exchanged pleasantries at school events, but never really talked. "They're great kids," he said, nodding toward my sons. "Thanks," I smiled. "I'm pretty fond of them." NWE sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, just watching our children play. "I read about your foundation," he said quietly. "What you're doing is incredible." I was taken aback. My past was not something I advertised, but it was a matter of public record. "Thank you," I said, a little guardedly. "My sister went through something similar," he continued, his voice soft. "Not as dramatic, maybe, but the betrayal, the financial abuse. It almost destroyed her. Someone like you, a foundation like yours, it would have made all the difference. So thank you, from all the brothers and fathers and sons out there who appreciate strong women." His words, his simple, sincere acknowledgement, touched a part of my heart I thought had closed off forever. We talked for over an hour that day, about everything and nothing. It wasn't a spark or a lightning bolt. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the gentle, tentative beginning of a new chapter I had never expected to write. NFOR. The first time since Daniel, I considered the possibility of a future that included a partner, a man who was not a project or a prize, but a true companion. Ben was kind, steady, and he looked at me not as a victim or a hero, but as a woman. He saw Clara. And as I watched him laugh, as his daughter ran up and threw her arms around his neck, I felt a sense of hope that had nothing to do with justice or revenge, and everything to do with the simple, beautiful possibility of a shared life. The old foundation had crumbled to dust, but here, in this quiet park, on a sunny afternoon, I realized I was finally ready to build a new one. NNTEN, years past. 10 years of peace, growth, and quiet joy. My sons, Leo and Noah, grew from energetic boys into thoughtful, kind young men of 17. They were the center of my world, my pride and my greatest achievement. Leo was the captain of the surf team, his easy smile and natural charisma making him popular, but he had a core of integrity that was all his own. Noah had discovered a passion for marine biology, spending his weekends volunteering at the local aquarium, his quiet nature masking a fierce intellect and a deep compassion for the natural world. They were good men. I had broken the cycle. NMY relationship with Ben had blossomed into a deep, loving partnership. We had married 5 years prior in a small ceremony on the beach, with our children as our only attendants. He was a wonderful stepfather to the boys, a steady, supportive presence who loved them as his own. Our life was a tapestry woven from the threads of family, community, and shared purpose. The Phoenix Foundation had grown into a national organization, helping thousands of women reclaim their lives. The past was a scar, but it no longer ached. Then, one evening, the ghost appeared, and I was in the kitchen helping Noah with a school project when the doorbell rang. Ben was out at a town meeting, and Leo was at surf practice. I opened the door without a second thought, expecting it to be a neighbor or a delivery